Hi everyone and welcome to the bunker, where we're talking about personal finances. I'm David and I'm joined today by Viviana.
Hey,
Viviana, let's talk about budgeting.
let's get into it.
Let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
So I guess a good place to start would be, do you budget? For example, how did you get started, or what kind of impact is that having on your life right now?
Yeah, so honestly, I didn't really budget so much until a couple of years ago. And I feel like it's because a lot of people don't budget because either they feel like they don't want to be limited by a budget, or you feel like if you have specific amounts of money for each thing, it's gonna limit the way you live your life. And I started budgeting when I realized and I heard from a friend that budgeting is more beneficial when you kind of customize it to your lifestyle, so then it doesn't feel limiting for you. You know what I mean? So my budget could be completely different from yours, and it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It means that one adjusts more to my needs. And I feel like once I found that a big part of budgeting is customizing your budget to work for you, that's when I kind of felt like I cracked the code a little bit. And from then on, I've been budgeting. And honestly, it's been something that has definitely helped me feel a little bit more financially secure, in the sense that I kind of have more control of my money. I know where it's going and how much I can save or invest and how much that will impact my financial situation in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So,
But yeah, what about you? Do you?
well, I'm interested to hear. So did you actually try budgeting a bit before, but you had maybe sort of rules down from your parents, or you should be doing this much on spending, this much on your wants, or this much on your needs, and that didn't work for you until you customized it for yourself?
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, it's to be able to budget. I think the first step is to know how much you are spending on fixed costs and how much money is coming in, right? And I think once you can settle that and be like, all right, so I have this amount coming in and this amount are things that I cannot not spend, let's say, then you know what is your margin of what's left, and you can see how much you want to allocate to each thing, right? But my view on it before was a little bit like, okay, if my budget is, let's say, spending 30% of what comes in housing, then instead that would feel limiting, and I would be like, I need to look for a place, I need to move because my place is out of my budget. You know what I mean? And I think that's when you feel like a budget is gonna completely change your life in a way that you don't necessarily want it to. That's when you're like, oh, why bother? Why make the effort? And I think for me it was mostly when I was like, yeah, if I look at it, I start from the situation that I'm in, understanding the situation that I'm in, it definitely changed. And I think it's just because budgeting really sounds like cutting costs and cutting I don't know, comfort or freedom. And I think that's, why'd you say that was limiting for me, that belief. And I think it's just because maybe growing up, I heard, budget in the sense that don't spend, save,
okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so budgeting just meant for you spending less money on the things. You want to buy something, but you can't do that because of the budget, not
exactly.
I'm budgeting so that I can buy the things that I want to buy. Okay.
Exactly. And also knowing why you're budgeting, right? If you just budget to budget, then there's really no point, right? I think that the two key things for me to start was understanding that I can make it my own and make it work for me, and two, understanding why I'm doing it. Am I budgeting to be able to be financially independent, or to be able to retire early, or to make a big purchase, or to save X amount of money? You need to know why you're doing it, so then it makes sense, right? And I feel I don't know for you what your views on budgeting were before, but for me it was more it's that thing that smart people do to save money and not spend too much.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really sound like any fun, right? So then it's like, why am I going to sit down and count every penny? Like, that just doesn't sound like something I wanted to do, you know?
Exactly. I mean, I when it comes to something like savings, for example, when I started making a distinction between my long-term savings and my short-term savings, that really helped. So I couldn't cut off maybe 20% of my income for like, oh, let's put these all into long-term savings, because I wasn't really saving that anywhere. It just went into my general savings pool. And then as soon as something big came along, or I wanted to book some flights or buy a special gift for myself, then suddenly that would come out of my savings, which, you know.
Yeah. And like knowing that, like, how would you describe the way you were handling your money, like maybe a few years ago and now? And what part has budgeting played? Like, how did you start? What are you doing now that is benefiting you?
Okay. I guess for myself, my journey was something like about 6 years ago. I started traveling. So I'm from New Zealand. I booked some flights. I came over here with sort of just one account and a pile of cash in it. I started traveling around, visiting friends, catching flights, and watching that pile sort of slowly diminish down to not very much. At a certain moment, I just started working, just doing any job I could to make a few bucks and pay the bills. But I started with the same kind of system, right? Money was coming in, paycheck to paycheck. It was going out again. The pile would build up, pile goes down, and it wasn't really sort of going anywhere. So after a few months or even a year of doing that, I recognized that my finances weren't sort of going anywhere. I was just sort of staying in the same spot. And that's when I started thinking about budgeting. I knew that I could live on not very much while I was traveling, and that as soon as I started earning more, that I started spending more. So I started taking my income and splitting it just two ways. It was 70% would go to my spendings, just you can spend this money, and 30% would go into my savings. So I think from that start, like knowing that I could sort of restrict myself a little bit to get to an end goal later on, that really helped. Now I split it even more ways, but mainly with that goal of just saying I have something left over at the end of the month, so that I can see month on month that my wealth is growing and not just staying the same or decreasing.
Yeah. And like, what would you say that your views on budgeting were like when you started doing it, and like now that you've been doing it for a while? Like, because for me, like I told you, like it felt a little bit limiting at the beginning, but for you, it seems like you were just like, okay, like I can try to cut to 70% and see what happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I guess, the start for me. I just took a random number and said, and maybe I heard someone talk about, oh, you should be doing X, Y, Z, right? But I mean, where does that should come from? Is it really the best outcome? I just took a stab at saying, I know that I can live on not very much while I'm backpacking, but, you know, now that I've got a stable place, like what are my fixed costs? What do I need to have? And then what am I doing with what's left? I think one of the things that really helped me was looking at what I was actually spending. So instead of starting with a budget of I should do this and then making it all fit, I took a month to just track my spending. Say like, okay, where are these payments going? Am I spending money at restaurants? Am I spending money at going out or on drinks with friends? And that for me was quite surprising. So I wouldn't have thought, for example, that I spent so much going out. But then after just watching what I did for 1 month, it was a bit of an eye opener.
Yeah. And what you're saying, I think it's actually like the best place to start budgeting, at least for me, like from my experience. Like observe yourself for a period of time and see how your lifestyle actually is. So then you can set something more realistic, right? Because it doesn't really matter if from your 70%, I'm spending 40 on restaurants and you're spending 40 on shopping. Like at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter so much. It's hard to make a guide, like this is what you should be spending. Yeah. But yeah, definitely, like I agree with you. Like a good place to start is just sit down and look at how your life actually looks like with your money when it comes in and at the end of the month. Yeah. And then understand what your habits are. And then from there, I don't know what you think about this, but for me, like if you see that you're spending I don't know, too much on one thing, let's say restaurants or nights out or whatever, like a lot of the time there's a temptation to be like, okay, so I'm just gonna cut the spending in half because it's too much. And that's when I think it becomes super hard to budget, because it's really unrealistic to like change your complete lifestyle, because at the end of the day, money is a tool for your lifestyle. So then it's completely different if you try to cut it by half, and then you're like, well, now I'm just bored, you know?
Exactly. I mean,
So,
I mean, one of a concrete example of that in my spending was, for example, restaurants. When I thought to make myself a budget, I thought, oh, 200 a month should be fine or something. But then when I looked at my actual spending, it was closer to 500. So if I had cut myself down to 200 straight off the bat, I probably wouldn't have been able to keep to my budget, right? That would have cut my lifestyle, under half. And then would I be going out less? Would I be turning down my friends when they want to go out to eat, or, not buying a round of drinks, for example? So, yeah, you're right. Sort of understanding where I was and then what I could actually keep that to sort of help me understand that, hey, I'm making the right choices here, but I'm not sacrificing everything about my life in the city to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to tell you, like, what would be, because I think some of the main things that have worked for me in terms of budgeting is what we just said. First, start by observing yourself and setting realistic expectations. 2, understand what's your goal and why you're doing it, and it's not saving just to save, like, what are you going to do with that money that you're saving? Is that money just going to sit there somewhere decreasing in value every time just to save it, Like, you also have to know why you're doing it and what your goal is, so you know what you're saving for. Should you put it in a savings account? Should you invest it? And then you see it more as a means to an end rather than just something that you're doing.
Yeah.
And then the third thing would be, like, automating it. Honestly, it's, like, the best way to go, because every month, at least for me, like, in my experience, every month if money comes in, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to think about, okay, because have you seen the envelope method?
Is that like taking cash out and like just like putting it somewhere you can't even see it?
So like online on Instagram and stuff, there's been like I've seen a bunch of videos of people like having their envelopes and putting like taking cash and putting like this much for this, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. They're super organized, but that just doesn't work for me. Like I'm not gonna sit down and do that.
Yeah,
like
head out to the cash machine every week and take out some cash and
then also like, well, we live in the Netherlands, right? And like here, you don't use cash that much in reality, right? So then it's like, for me, automating it was honestly best way to do it. Like money comes in, automatic transfer is set to automatically take out the stuff that I'm gonna save and I'm not gonna spend. And then if you want to do it even better, then you can have separate accounts for different purposes and just automate everything. Like this is for, I don't like to be super specific, so I don't go like, this is for shopping, this is for groceries. Like that's a little bit too much for me. But I kind of divide it like in needs and leisure, right? So like if it's grocery store food, if it's stuff like that, that's needs, right? Like that's like the most economic way you can get it. And then restaurants, like buying stuff, that would be like leisure and wants. And then that works for me because I don't feel limited. I'm not like, oh, then I can't spend this euro in restaurants because this was meant for nights out. Like for me, that's not big of a difference, but for some people it works, right? But for me, automating it, good idea. What do you think about that? Like, how do you do it?
Well, no, actually, I was doing something very similar. I mean, I can see sort of in my banking insights what I spend things on by category, sure, but my budgeting was still going on a wants and needs basis. So it was, wants, needs, and savings. I found with savings, actually, like you said, kind of like the envelope method. I took my savings account and I made it invisible so I couldn't see it. And I found that for me, this was one of the best ways that I could actually do it, right? Because if I could see it sitting there and there's actually a little bit of money there. Then suddenly, my desire to save kind of went away. So I cut the visibility. I couldn't see it at all. And that helped me a lot because suddenly when I actually forgotten about it, and then when I looked back, oh, there it is. So
yeah, exactly. Like if you pretend it's money that you don't have, then you're not gonna be tempted to spend it. You know.
Actually, a friend of mine keeps their savings at a different bank entirely, just so that it's not sitting in their accounts. They make an automatic payment once every week. It goes there, and they don't have a card for that account either, so they can't use it at all. But then because it's out of sight, it's out of mind completely.
Yeah, exactly. And my savings account also doesn't have a card, so I can't really pay anything, you know what I mean? But I think that works. Like I think you just have to know yourself and know what works for you.
Yeah, well, also with things like, for example, like a budget that's specifically for clothing, right? Like I don't necessarily buy new clothes every month. So if I have a budget set for that, then I might not use it 1 month, but then use twice as much the next month. So I agree with you that that's how my budgeting usually works. It's out of my sort of my wants category, and if 1 month there's nothing left, then well,
yeah.
I think that's always the hardest bit about budgeting is not like making the right decisions at the right moment. At least in my experience, I know that when it comes, like when payday comes, the money hits my account, I can be very good at putting things in the right place. But then when it comes to the week before, or maybe exactly on a night out, that suddenly my desire to live my best, to be my best self kind of flies out the window. Yeah. So I've tried to make my systems in a way that like live up to my, like the things that I'm looking for, exactly my sort of my goals in the future, so that when I'm, in my weak moments, that I don't accidentally sort of say, well, I'll just shift some money around and spend it all.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for me, I'm a little bit the same. Like I'm not super strict with sticking to a budget for like specific things. So if I go out, like it's not like I'm like tonight I'm only spending X amount. Like not necessarily, because the way that it has worked for me is to look at, like you said, like the general goal. Yeah. Like my goal is that this money that it's going out of my account the day after my paycheck, and it's gonna go to either savings or investments, and this is what is contributing to my future wealth, or maybe a trip you want to take, because it's not the same goal for everybody. Then for the rest, I try my best to divide it in a way that makes sense, but I'm not so strict with sticking to it, because I think an important part of these financial habits are making them enjoyable a little bit, right? Because if you don't enjoy it, it's just you're just gonna feel like, why am I sticking to a budget that makes me not have my freedom or my best life or have fun, So
have you noticed the difference, for example, like now that you've been, trying to keep track of your money and budgeting better, it's a couple of years on. Do you have things now? Like what's your experience with it now?
Yeah, so I think that now for me, my goal was to stop living paycheck to paycheck, right? And in that sense, I have accomplished my goal. So the way that I see that it's working for me is that I want to retire early. So I don't want to have to be dependent on a paycheck for the rest of my life, And right now I'm in my mid-20s, so I feel like the sooner you start, right, the better. So for me, I feel like the way it's changed is that now I feel more secure. Like if something happens, I have extra that I can use, when I look at my future, and if you try to make some calculations, if you have the energy or time for it, then you can see like, oh, maybe by the time I'm 50, I'm not necessarily going to have to work all the time, And I think that's something very much of our generation, like the 9 to 6 concept, and work until you're 60 something, and that's all kind of a little bit losing the appeal for a lot of younger people, and I completely understand why, because it feels limiting sometimes, right? Like that's why there's a bunch of digital nomads now and people that don't want to be tied down to something. So I think for me, budgeting has helped me feel closer to freedom, not even just in the financial sense, just in the sense that I don't have to be tied down to anything, right? But it's definitely more of a future oriented thing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my friends, she budgets only for traveling. But that's what she does, and it works for her, right? Like she sets a goal. She's like, I want to go on this trip, and I need X amount by X month. And she organizes all her budget, and then she goes on her trip. But then there's like a benefit of budgeting, you know? Yeah. Like, what about you?
So, I mean, in that sense, it's even like their budgeting is kind of short term, and well, not even like sort of a sort of immediate term, whereas yours is more like I want more choices in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I guess you definitely do see that. I feel the same way. A lot of people are budgeting also to save themselves time. I mean, not waiting until you're retired, until you can actually do something with your life, but also saying, well, actually, by the time I'm 40, I want to be working 4 days a week, and then by 50, 3 days a week or something like that. So actually saving in a way that lets them, like gives them those choices later on, not being forced to be doing 40 hours until pension kicks in or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But what would you say to someone that, because I hear a lot of people say this, like, I want to make a budget, I want to be smart about my finances, but like it takes too much time, or like I don't know where to start. Like, what would you say to someone who's interested in it and doesn't necessarily like have the time or the knowledge?
Mm-hmm. I think a great way to start is with automatic things. You only have to think about them once, and then they're off your plate. A great thing that helped me, like one of the first things that I did was I started sending $50 a week, actually to a different bank account. This was small. I didn't really notice it coming out. I would see it every week and think, okay, but I just made the decision once when I thought, okay, today's the day, and after that I sort of stopped thinking about it. That was the first step that helped me move into budgeting better as well. I went from that into then splitting things up and making more payments to different accounts. So once you have that, once you have the inspiration, I'd say just give it a go. Definitely, like you said, have a goal. That was when I started saving and started budgeting. I didn't actually really know what I wanted. Indeed, I just started because someone said it was a good idea, and you should be more financially responsible. But I didn't actually have a goal. So the first goal that I ever saved for was a stand-up paddleboard. So. And actually, it was I put down €500. I said that's what I wanted to spend on it, and then it was I made it invisible so I couldn't see it. And then one day I got a notification that, hey, you've hit your goal. So that was just something, and it seemed dumb at the time. Like it's not I wasn't thinking big picture. I wasn't trying to buy a house. I wasn't trying to do any of those things. It was just hey, here's a toy that I'd like to have, but doesn't really fit into my spending on a monthly basis.
Yeah, no, like, I think that, like you said, like, we could sit here and talk about, like, the 50-30-20 rule, like, 50% should go to this, but I feel like we are not financial experts. We're just young people who have figured out a way that where it works for them, and I think what you're saying is such a good place to start for, like, someone who's never done this before but wants to, like, just start small, have a goal, and it doesn't have to be from the beginning, like, gain financial freedom, right? Like, just get yourself used to having a goal where you have to organize your money better to achieve it, and then you get the benefit of it, and then that kind of gets you on the roll,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think once you start doing it, you start seeing the results, and that can be a big motivator. From when you're backpacking and you get down to your last $100, it's that's not a fun experience. But once you start putting some of these practices into place, and you start saying, I've got $1,000 sitting now in my account, and I've got $2,000, and a few months later, I've got $5,000, $6,000, and then you can kind of start to see it build up. I think for me, that was like I tried some things because I should be giving them a go, and then once I saw the result, that was what kind of inspired me to say, hey, if I keep going like this, then, maybe in the future I could buy a house, or maybe I could be saving for some of these bigger things that, back when I was still backpacking and, living on nothing, those were just pipe dreams. They were completely impossible. I didn't even dare to dream of the bigger things. So. Well, I think it's about all the time that we have for today. Although I feel like we could keep on going like this for hours.
Yeah. There's so much that you can talk about this topic, but no, I think we got a good like general understanding of like how you do it, how I've done it, and hopefully some people can take some inspiration from it. Just like we're two normal people, and don't put too high expectations on yourself. But yeah, it was fun.
Hey, if you feel like you got something out of this today, then make sure you join us for the next episode and like and subscribe for the next episode.
Don't miss it.